He's a one-man wrecking group.
An information outlet, a town crier, a wake-up call.
He is my neighbor. He is fanning my assholes.
Well, I have a microphone, and you don't.
So you will listen to every damn word I have to say!
Did you eat a lot of paint chips when you were a kid? Why?
What's your name, scumbag?
Hey, what's going on? Bill Wolitzka here.
Hey, this is Red Beach from White Snake. Hey, this is John Karabi. Hey, this is George Lynch.
Hi, this is Wendy from the Screening Room Movie Theater in downtown Kingston. You're listening to The Kasey Ferguson Show.
Hey there, hi there, hello there, welcome to the Kasey Ferguson Show. As logic would dictate, I am Kasey Ferguson, and I'm going to do things a little bit differently tonight. Many of you have been sending me messages on Facebook and Twitter asking me when episode 9 of the Kasey Ferguson Show is coming out. Others have been messaging saying, Kasey, we want more of the Kasey Ferguson Show. Well, I'm many things, but a liar isn't one of them, so here's the truth. I was asked for the third year in a row to be venue coordinator and pick the bands for the rock venue of the Kingston Homegrown Live Music Festival, which is the biggest music festival in my hometown of Kingston, Ontario, and I got so fucking busy doing this thing that I fell behind on episode 9 of the Kasey Ferguson Show. I apologize for the wait, everybody, but I'm only one man. There's only so many hours in the day, and this is a one-man production. A one-man show, if you will. I don't have a fucking team writing questions and booking guests, editing interviews, any of that shit. That's me. You send me a song from your band, I'm the one listening to it, not some other fucking jack-off. Too many cooks spoil the fucking stew. Can you dig it? Anyway, here's the good news. The Kingston Homegrown Live Music Festival 2014 went off without nearly a hitch. A record-setting 98 acts took to the stage to raise money for the Joe Chittleton Memorial Music Instrument Lending Library and the Partners in Mission Food Bank. The numbers aren't in yet, but I know we did well. The Kasey Ferguson Show, episode 9, will be online in about 2 weeks, featuring interviews with legendary guitarist George Lynch of Dawkin, Lynch Mob, and his new band KXM, featuring Ray Loser from Korn and Doug Pinnock from King's X. Renowned White Snake and winger guitarist Red Beach will also be joining me on episode 9 of the Kasey Ferguson Show. So I thought to myself, well, I finish up episode 9, what can I do for you, my dear listeners, to make it up to you, to hold you over until episode 9 hits the air? How about an interview with legendary pro wrestler The Franchise, Shane Douglas? Shane's career spans 3 decades. He's wrestled for ECW, WWF, WCW, and TNA, and held 11 titles over the course of his career. Shane is a 3-time ECW World Heavyweight Champion and a 1-time NWA World Heavyweight Champion. He was also a WCW Tag Team Champion with Ricky Steamboat and held the WWF Intercontinental Championship. What you may not know is that Shane has also worked as a school teacher and a motivational speaker.
My name is Matt Foley, and I am a motivational speaker.
He stars in Cody Knott's new film Pro Wrestlers vs. Zombies with fellow wrestling legends Rowdy Roddy Piper, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Kurt Angle, and Matt Hardy. Tonight on the Kasey Ferguson Show, we cut the music and make way for The Franchise, Shane Douglas. You're listening to the Kasey Ferguson Show. I'm on the phone with legendary pro wrestler Shane, The Franchise Douglas. What's going on, Shane?
I'm doing great, Casey. How you doing, brother?
Oh, I'm hanging in there, pal, hanging in there. Now, something I found interesting, you're not only just starring in Pro Wrestlers vs. Zombies, but you're also producing and acting as the fight choreographer. Which did you enjoy more, the on-camera work or behind the scenes?
You know, it'll sound funny to fans that know me. I really enjoy behind the camera more because, you know, let's be fair and honest, the franchise is the character that I play. So when I'm on screen, I've got to remember the precepts of that character as I'm moving forward. And it's pretty natural for me now after doing it for so long. But behind the scenes, I can take a much more objective view of what, like as a fight choreographer, what I'm looking at. And, you know, watching it from the camera's eye and deciding, did we capture what we wanted from, say, Matt Hardy or Kurt Angle or any of the guys in the movie? We had some phenomenal young talent, guys like there's a kid here from Pittsburgh called Facade, who's certainly going to be a big star, or certainly should be in the business. You know, so it was a lot of fun for me to sit behind the scenes and watch. You know, anybody that knows me knows I'm extraordinarily passionate about the professional wrestling business, and I never try to impart more import on the business than it deserves. But the wrestling industry is a hugely phenomenal and hugely successful entertainment genre that, if not done properly, I didn't want to do it in a way that it comes up on camera making it look really bad. Like, I just watched WrestleMania. I was at a party, and, well, the camera edits, I hadn't seen a WrestleMania in probably 5 or 6 or 7 years, and the camera edits were horrible. And watching, I said to my webmaster, Mike Petkovich, why? The first time it happened, I thought, okay, that was a screw-up. But then second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh time, it kept happening. Mike, I said, what the hell's going on? And he said, oh, that's what they do. That's the way they shoot it now. And I said, why? And he said, because, the Vince McMahon or any guy that I'd ever worked for would have fired people for that 10 years ago. And he told me that, and my webmaster stays pretty much attuned to the business, so I'm guessing he has a much better insight than I do. But he said that they do that because they know the camera's going to catch how bad the spot looks. So they tend to go to the dirty shot as opposed to the clean shot that lets the fans see. That's amazing to me, where I come from in the business,
So these guys just aren't working as snug as you guys did in your era.
Yeah, it's just a different generation. I mean, I don't advocate. Well, I guess I do advocate for that style, but there's a price to pay for that. And I've got zippers on every part of my body, and aches and pains that I shouldn't have at my age and the condition that I'm in. But it's what comes with the business, and it'd be disingenuous to say, hey, I thought I could get into professional wrestling and have a career for 35 years and never get hurt. It comes with the territory. Like, I saw Paul Stanley from Kiss do an interview one time, and he said, look, if you want to be a politician, don't bitch when you have to wear a tie. And so I'm not bitching that I'm wearing the zippers.
Fair enough. Well, now, when you became involved in the film, was there already a script? Like, what did Cody pitch to you?
Well, it was actually, Cody Knox had come up to me. It's crazy. As you get older, you hear the phrase, how small the world is. The world can be a small place. And I'd always found it an incredibly large place, because I grew up in a very, very tiny pinpoint on the map called Pulaski Township, Pennsylvania. So when Cody came up to me at one of the horror conventions, about 4 years ago now, in Pittsburgh at Monroeville, which is at the Monroeville Mall, which is where Dawn of the Dead was filmed by George Romero.
Nice.
He came up to me and introduced himself, and the small world that it is, he was a freshman at Bethany College while I was a senior, and I didn't know him on campus. He was a Phi Tau, I was a Beta, and I was pretty involved my senior year, and I was on the road wrestling pretty consistently during the weekends, and was the student government president. It's called the Student Board of Governors, and was involved in a million different things. But I was gone quite often on the weekends with wrestling. In fact, almost missed my graduation because of wrestling. And he came up and introduced himself. And it's the Bethanian says, "Hey, I'm from Bethany." It just create a common bond. And he told me the idea. And to be honest with you, Casey, we'll pitch ideas like this so often in our business. If I had $1 for every time, I'd probably be a millionaire. Literally, that often. And so, we had a nice talk, and I gave him my contact information, really believing I'd never hear from him again, because that's the way it always goes. And about 6 months later, I got a phone call from him saying that he had finished the script and he wanted to send me the email. Email me the script, and he sent it to me, and it was the first draft. So it was pretty basic, very different from what the script had evolved into in the movie, but it had some of the basic todays. And the first thing that I could see was that he was trying to be respectful to the wrestling business in this sense. He wasn't right. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself in the story. There was I get to the dialogue for Piper, and it wasn't written for anybody specifically, but Piper was somebody that he hoped for, and Duggan was somebody that he hoped for, and but I noticed my dialogue and all the guys' dialogue was in red, and I called him and I said, why is all the dialogue in red? And he said, that's because that's my words as what I'm looking for, but I can't possibly tell Shane Douglas how to say this, or Piper how to say it.
Right.
And so he meant that was just the gist of what he wanted us to say in that particular scene. And for me to say it like how the franchise would say it, how Roddy Piper would say it, and so forth. And when he said that showed me a lot of respect for the business, because let's face it, Roddy Piper knows how to speak for Roddy Piper. I know how to speak for the franchise. And so that's what really lured me into it, and that was how I became involved before I would contact any of the guys in the business. I wanted to make sure he was coming from the right place. When I saw that, that's when I thought he started making the phone calls.
Well, yeah, I mean, if he has Piper and yourself, some of the greatest promo guys in the history of the business, and you come in and he says, here's what you're going to fucking say, it'd be a little fucking ridiculous, and I wouldn't blame you for not wanting to be involved.
Yeah. And again, that's why I can see that, A, he's a huge wrestling thought that when I first met him, but he also was coming from a place of, I mean, let's face it, I've known a lot of writers, and writers are very protective of their writing. They want their writing to bleed through. And Cody's no different. Cody comes from that same place, but he's enough of a wrestling fan to know that Kasey Ferguson in Ontario will know if Shane Douglas spoke like that, or if Roddy Piper doesn't or anything spoke like that. So really smart on his part, but I probably would have been hesitant to get involved had he not come with that approach. Not that I expected or that I was even looking specifically for it, but because he came with that approach, that showed me that he had a respect for the business and a respect for us in the business, that he could take that step back.
Well, now, how collaborative was the blocking of the fight scenes? Like, did you get a lot of input from the other wrestlers and what they wanted to do, or were they somewhat mapped out in the script? Or
no, absolutely. It was wide open. I've got a great amount of respect for my counterparts in the movie and all that they've brought to the table. I mean, let's face it, they're stars in the business because of what they've accomplished. So what I just said about Cody was pretentious for me to sit there and say, Roddy Piper, you shouldn't fight like that. You should do it like this. I would give them a very general overview of what we were looking for from the camera sweep perspective, because we were shooting in very large areas. It was an actual prison that we were filming in, and so I wanted the camera to catch the panorama of cell block A, cell block B, and there are a lot of scenes in the movie that were very tight because of hallways and corner. We didn't have the luxury of a set where we could just move walls and how we had position it however we wanted it. We had to shoot with the physicality of the building, and so I would just go through and like with Matt Hardy, for instance, in his fight scene, I would say, okay, because his fight scene was really intense, and so was Facades, in the sense that they had a ton of extras in the scene.
right.
Now, these were locals that had no experience in front of a camera, let alone in wrestling, and so we would have to specifically go to this one guy and say, okay, when Matt moves from here to here, you need to move here to this exact spot. And so it was like about a 3-hour layout for the fight scene. I think it comes off on screen for about 3 to 4 minutes maybe, but it took hours and hours and hours to block it out and set it up. And Matt came in and told me, I'd like to do, he checked out the area and what he was working in, and I told him what we were looking for from the camera suite perspective, and then he would say, okay, well, how about if I do this and this, and then do this, and then go over here. And so I would just have to block it out the way that he wanted it, because he's coming from a wrestling perspective of, as Matt Hardy, I'm just going to do these moves and do it this way. But we have to make sure that the camera's in position to catch it and to know where everybody else is going to be, so that this extra doesn't step in the camera way or whatever. It sounds a lot more scientific and strategic than it was. It was just an awful lot of talking and explaining, but it was a lot of fun.
When did you start teaching school?
My first year of teaching was January of 1991. My dad, who at some point passed away in 1993, had contracted a latter-stage emphysema, a lifelong smoker, World War II vet, decorated World War II vet, and like most people from that generation, was very reluctant to share the fact that he wasn't feeling well, with anybody else. He was 78 years old. At that point, I think 75 or 76 years old. And obviously he was slowing down, but worked much harder than any 76-year-old I knew. And I was on the road for Vince McMahon at the time when this happened, and late 1990. And when he first went into the hospital, they said he had 3 to 5 days to live. He ended up fighting through that and living 3 years beyond that.
Oh, wow.
But, so obviously I couldn't be on the road, and as his only son, be home taking care of him as well. And somebody's on oxygen and regular medicine regimens and things of that nature. So I had to leave the road and come home to help take care of my dad, but I also had to work. I wasn't in a position where I couldn't work. And so I started teaching in 1991. My first 2 years of teaching, 1991 to 1993 school year, I was a special education teacher for, at that time it was called SNED, Socially Emotionally Disturbed Kids. But with political correctness taking hold, that was changed by the end of my second year to emotional support, because they didn't want the kids to feel bad that they were crazy.
And then they grow up to be me.
Yeah, political correctness, it's a farce to me.
Same here.
One thing it has to say another, but I
don't you also work as a motivational speaker?
I do. Not quite as often now. I quite often taught, back when I did it frequently, to mostly young sports groups, football teams, baseball teams, basketball teams. And now, this past year, having gotten involved as an assistant coach with my son's wrestling team, I love being around kids. And I know that sounds weird in the post-Jerry Sandusky era, but I mean, there's a youthful energy that comes from them that I think keeps you young. I've watched, my boys are 8 and 13 now, 8 and 13. But watching them develop and their teammates develop into young men, young women, it's just really an amazing process to watch and awe-inspiring. It gives you the ambition to get up in the morning and drive. And so I don't get quite a chance to now. Before we started the interview, I told you, I'm so busy. There's so many different things between promoting the zombie movie now and helping Cody Knott's write the next. He's got a sequel coming out to it.
Fantastic.
And starting a new wrestling company here in the fall.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could tell me a bit about that, perhaps later on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to, because we're very excited about it. But it's all things that as you said before the interview started, you're a little person. There's only so many hours in the day, so we've had to sort of put the wrestling company not on hold, but sort of push it back, because we've been getting so much response to the Pervert versus Zombies movie that, in fact, it's being shown this week, or it's just been shown. I'm not quite sure the exact time frame. At the Cannes Film Festival by Troma.
Oh, wow.
So that's going to be very big, and I think a smart move on Troma's part, because, let's face it, Roddy Piper and Hacksaw Jim Duggan and the franchise and Matt Hardy and Kurt Angle and, Red Sky, we are known internationally, and so when I first heard of that, it's going to be jokes, and I couldn't imagine that, because I think of the Cannes Film Festival, like when they show movies like Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
They confirmed it to me as it's being shown there, and so it's just one of those things where the wrestling company is going to happen. We're working very hard on it behind the scenes as much as time will allow, and hopefully very soon here, once the movie gets released by Troma on a big basis, we'll be able to take a lot more active stance on promoting the new company.
Well, and congratulations on the Troma distribution deal. I've been a fan of those guys for a long time, Toxic Avenger and all that, so congrats, man. That's really exciting.
Thank you. I got to plead ignorance. Being so busy, I don't get a chance to watch too many movies lately, and probably the last 15, 20 years. I love watching movies, and I just had never gotten it. I of course, had seen Toxic Avengers and a couple other big titles that they had released, but I didn't know who they were, and so we got involved with them, and then started seeing, going to all these screenings and conventions and horror conventions, Troma, and what a fan following they have, and I think it's the right fit,
Absolutely.
Cody told me that when he signed the deal with them, and I think it's the right fit. This is that kind of a movie, and when you see it, you'll see that it fits in that vein. It's to a very specific genre, and it's very much in the vein that we need to step back away from it, just enjoy it for what it is. It's a great movie for wrestling fans.
Well, and I think it was a genius idea on Cody's part to marry the two genres. I mean, you go to any of these fan conventions, and there's almost always a couple pro wrestlers along with the horror guys and this and that. So bringing the two together, it's really a perfect fit in my eyes.
Yeah, like Cody said, and I agree with him. He was shocked that Vince McMahon hadn't come up with the idea, because as big as zombies are right now, and have been for the last several years, with The Walking Dead and all the different kinds of zombie movies coming out, it's surprising that McMahon hadn't come up with it first. But thank God he didn't.
Well, he came up with everything else, I guess. So.
Yeah, he'd have probably ruined it too.
So, I don't know. I've seen The Marine, and I've seen No Holds Barred and the WWF movies. He should maybe stay out of that for a little while.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, I got a pretty high cheese factor, but No Holds Barred's up there for sure.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, when you take a step back and look at it, I'm a huge Kiss fan and always have been, and, it's amazing to me that all these years later they're still going and still touring and still selling albums. But I just saw an interview with Paul Stanley, and he said, the person interviewing asked, what do you think, what's the first thing you think of whenever
Yeah.
He said, why? I'm sure at the time he thought it was a great idea, and they just started to let a lot of people around them work on it and shove all these different ideas at them, and as busy as I'm sure they were at that time and still are, followed the lead, and I've come to realize at this late age, my mom used to say you don't get to be 50 without living it, and at my 50 I've realized that I'm not going to give anybody the reins to the franchise St. Douglas, including Vince McMahon, except for me. I have the connection to the guy. I've got the history with the guy, and I know what he's good at. I know what he's not good at, and so I'm just reluctant to let anybody else have that and have that run of it. And McMahon, I'm sure, has his own reasons for no holds barred and all the movies that they've done, but they were playing to an audience of 8, 9, 10-year-old kids, and that's a lot easier to sell with a movie that of people that aren't looking, say, at our ages, looking at acting quality and the way the thing is set up and whatever. And I don't want to over-criticize because Pro Wrestling vs. Zombies is not Citizen Kane, but it is what you expect from Roddy Piper, exactly what you expect from Hacksaw Jim Duggan and the rest of the crew. So it's a lot of fun for wrestling fans.
Well, and I mean, it would be certainly, we've seen Piper's got the acting chops, but they live and things like that. But it probably would be a little ridiculous to, like you said, to try to make Citizen Kane and stick you guys into a role maybe that you're not completely comfortable with.
Sure. Well, I can hear the franchise now. To be or not to be, that is the question. it even sounds absurd coming out of my mouth. But the franchise can cut the fucking music with the best of them.
Absolutely. Now, what made you decide to become a pro wrestler?
Oh, it's one of those things that just sort of happened. I mean, I'd always been very passionate about the business. I remember probably in the range of 4 years old. I might have been 3. But I remember around 4.5 years old, in that time frame, watching studio wrestling out of Pittsburgh with Bruno Sammartino, who's the WWF then, and watching it and just loving it. And I remember because Batman, the old TV series, used to come on right before wrestling would come on. And I used to always put a towel around my neck, and I would never make it through an entire wrestling show because I'd get so excited that I'd jump off the couch with my brothers and sisters, and I'd end up going to my bedroom. My mom would sit in the bedroom and wouldn't allow me to watch the rest of it. And I was about 12 or 13. Cable finally came to Pittsburgh, cable television. And I can vividly remember, and the reason it sticks out in my mind is because my dad always, he worked on the railroad and was always gone. And we were over visiting. My mom and dad were divorced, of course, and my sister and I were over visiting right after he had gotten cable television. And it was an extraordinarily rare Saturday night that he was home because he was always gone on the weekends. And he wanted to sit down and watch wrestling. And I had no idea that he liked wrestling. And I had watched wrestling for years prior to that. And but I kept up with it through the magazines, reading about it. And my friends and I were fans of it and would dabble watching it here and there. But then when cable television came to Pittsburgh, suddenly we were able to see not the local Pittsburgh studio version, but the national version of the WWF, and then the NWA on the Superstation, and then WCW after that. And but that, of course, I was already in business at that point. But I remember the first scene sitting down with my dad at midnight on a Saturday night watching wrestling, and the very first segment was Superstar Billy Graham and the Grand Wizard, his manager, behind the section of cage for a cage match. He had a match coming up with Bruno. I had known of Bruno quite some time at that point. You don't grow up knowing Bruno Sammartino. And seeing this segment with this, 6'2", 6'3", bleach blonde, muscular, tanned, tie-dyed, but he could talk. That was what really captivated me, was this guy could rap.
Yeah.
And I remember, I'm getting goosebumps now talking. So I was sitting with my dad watching this, and I remember thinking to myself, this is the coolest fucking thing I've ever seen in my life. And it never, ever, even once I'd met Dominic Tanucci and had trained with him, never even had the gumption to believe or the pretension to believe that I could be a professional wrestler. I just loved it so much. And, obviously once Dominic started training Mick Foley and I, there was a passion in the both of us that stood out against most of the other people that he was training. That bled through. It's impressive that one person trained two of the bigger names in the wrestling business of the last quarter century. But when I look back at it, it seems in some ways a long time ago, but in other ways it seems like yesterday. I vividly remember Mick and I working our asses off. There was another guy that went on to become Cody Michaels that would work very hard with us, but he ended up breaking his neck and got out of the business. And, the other guys would sit around and they'd get in and they'd do a few things and they'd get out. And I really clearly remember them sitting in Dominic's gym saying, they'd get in, do a few moves, 15, 20, 30 minutes here, and then they'd get out. And we'd be there all day on, Friday evenings, all day Saturday, like 7 a.m. to 7, 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, and then Sunday mornings until 5, 6, 7 o'clock. They'd get in there, and then they would get out, and they would talk to each other, saying stuff like, I don't know why Bret Hart's a big star, I'm better than he is. But, Mick and I and Cody would always laugh at those things and just keep going in the ring, and Dominic Benucci would finally say, okay, guys, get the fuck out of the ring, I gotta get home, and he had literally drag us out of the ring because we were like kids in a candy store. We just loved the wrestling business.
Very much the same thing for radio for me. I actually got in, we have a high school station here where I went to school at KCVI, and so I got in the end of grade 10, I volunteered for a summer and then got in for the senior courses and stuff, and I remember the janitors, like, we're locking up, you need to go home.
Yeah, no. When passion takes over, I've always said, I was trained as a teacher, my education was in politics and management. There's a million other things I could have done, but I know with certainty if I would drop dead right after this interview, I've lived my passion. I can't imagine. I saw somebody do an interview recently that said, if you follow your passion, you'll never be unhappy. You can never do wrong. And I followed my passion, and I've seen more than I care to of the bad side of wrestling. But with that in mind, I've also, as a kid that grew up in that little tiny place called Pulaski Township, Pennsylvania, have seen, I've been around the globe. I've seen many of the wonders of the ancient world. I've traveled and met more wonderful people than I could have ever dreamt of ever possibly meeting. And, so I don't know what, could I have made more money or better career decisions? I'm sure I could have. But as far as the wrestling industry goes, it's afforded me a lifestyle that I'm very comfortable with, and it's given me, the blessings of life, I would call them. The things, to be able to get up in the morning and realize that the sunrise and the sunset every day are an amazing thing to me. And I think that in part comes from being in the wrestling business. When you see those bad things that you don't like and you know are wrong, that you tend to pay more attention to the beautiful things in life. And watching my two boys being born, I mean, was ethereal to me. And seeing this, I'm thinking, my God, this is awe-inspiring. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that resets the hand of time. And, so to me, that's the kind of stuff that as corny as it may sound to somebody else, to me, those are the things that really captivate me today, as a father. And, it's not a question of, well, there's money over here and less money this way, so I'm going to go to more money. That's not the question anymore. The question is, what makes me happy? And that doesn't make me happy. A lot of money over there, that kind of stuff doesn't make me happy. But this over here, there's less money or maybe no money. That makes me happy. There was no money in coaching my kids' wrestling team this year. But I can't imagine anything giving me more entertainment and more enjoyment than having watched these kids wrestle their asses off for the entire season. And, so it's just a different state of life. And I think it's different. When I was 25, it was a little bit different. It's different now at 50.
Well, now, you sort of touched on this earlier. Now, when you have those moments where, because, I'm a musician, I've seen, unfortunately, as much as I love music, there are times where I hate the music business, and it makes it very hard to stay in that business. I mean, how hard has it been for you over the years, knowing that you love wrestling so much, but some of the business things that go on behind the scenes, how hard was it to stick with?
That's a great question. I don't think I've ever been asked that question. It's been, at times very difficult. When I left the road to take care of my dad, and then I went back to wrestling and was wrestling with Steamboat. I had seen enough of the politics of wrestling at that point that I didn't really like the business. I loved professional wrestling and the sport. I couldn't stand the business. But it was the industry that I was in. And
right.
So I thought, well, I'll just toughen up and, go in and swallow my pride and, and do whatever I'm going to do. And so when I went back with Steamboat, I was loving it because I was with one of the greatest wrestlers, I think, in history, and learning from him on a nightly basis. And from that standpoint, it was phenomenal. Until 6-7 months into the run, I had hurt my shoulder in a match and had to have surgery on my shoulder. Not a serious surgery, but a surgery that's going to necessitate 3 to 4 or 5 weeks off.
Right.
That when they started doing the Dos Hombres and putting somebody, I think Tom Zank and Brad Armstrong were the two that replaced me in the Dos Hombres because I was off. And amazing to me to this day, Kasey, people still ask me about, why did you and Steamboat wear the masks when you guys lost the belts? Well, that's why, because it wasn't Shane Douglas and Ricky Steamboat that lost the belts. And, it was amazing to me because it wasn't that we were unwilling to drop the belts to Brian and Steve. They were clearly talented enough and good enough to hold the belts. It was I was off with a surgery. The wrestling industry, the powers that be that were in charge at that time decided and deemed that they were going to do it then anyway, and that was the cornball way that they got to do it. And after I left wrestling in '93 from Steamboat, I was really turned off to the industry. I mean,
right.
Just had my gullet full.
Who was running things then? Was that Watts? Was that Jim Crockett? Or who was there then? Dusty?
To be quite honest, I can't really recall. I know Watts was there at the formation of the Blondes because he wanted me to be one of the Blondes. The original Hollywood Blondes was to be me and Brian Pillman.
Right.
And I know he was there at the outset. I think by that time he'd gone. I want to say it was Ole. I may be wrong on the time frame on that. All I remember is just being just utterly dejected at the business. Like I had had it. And I left and, it was good to teach. And I did teach for some years. That was in 1992. Then late 93, Eddie Gilbert started calling. And I had a world of respect for Eddie. Aside from being, I thought, a completely underdecorated talent in the business, but just a phenomenal mind for the business.
I agree.
And he had given me my break in the business, so obviously when Eddie Gilbert called, I would answer. And he had gone to the Eastern Championship Wrestling at that time, ECW, and was talking about starting something new and had all these ideas and wanted me to come in, and I thanked him, I explained my reason to him, and I turned him down. I didn't want to go. I was like a drunk trying to stay out of the bar. I just didn't want to go around the business anymore. I had it. I'd seen enough of the good at that point, and I didn't want that to get ruined by the bad that I was seeing in the industry. And I just have too much pride at times. I'm guilty of that in the sense that I can't, when I know something's right or wrong in my head, I can't just go against the grain and go what is counterintuitive to me and what makes the fiber of my being.
Right.
And so I couldn't say yes to him, and he kept calling me, bless his heart, and thank God for it. He kept calling me, and he kept sweetening the deal, raising the money, and that wasn't fantastic money, but he was throwing an extra $50, an extra $100, and then another $50, another $100, and I kept turning him down, and finally he called me. He said, "How about if we would let you be the lead heel?" And when he said that, and I remember at the time, Kasey, that I was in the business at that point, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy, 235 pounds with abs, wasn't the heel. You had to be the big fat guy with a wart on your chin. And
yeah, you'd always worked baby up till that point, right?
Yeah, I'd never been heel, and nobody ever let me be heel. Although Bill Watts had dabbled with the idea because he saw the heel of my promos, even with Steamboat.
Right.
But that really piqued my interest. It interested me because I'd always said when I got into the business that I wanted to learn as much as I could about the business as I possibly could before I got out. And so being the heel had never really been offered to be in a formal way, a realistic formal way. That piqued my interest. And that was what lured me back into the business. That's what lured the drunk back into the bar. And and like I said, thank God for it, because my entire career has revolved around the ECW run, thank God, and not the Dynamic Dudes run or the Dean Douglas run, but those were things that, I meet fans. It's amazing to me because I meet fans every single weekend, and lots of them, that come up and they'll say, hey, these are my kids. Geez, I used to come to the arena. I used to watch ECW all the time on this station, on that station, and I just want to say thank you, because you really entertained me a lot over the years. And that is, I guess, for a guy that reaches my age and my stage in the career, that is about as complimentary a thing as you can say to me. Because I always tell them, thank you for watching, because if you didn't watch, it wouldn't have mattered.
Yeah, it wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, it would have all been flushed down the toilet. It was all that effort for nothing. And so that continues the love affair of the ECW talent to the fans, that there was always an affinity between us and a respect between us. Almost like the crowd was the sixth man on the bench for us, and we knew that. And that was, I think, a large part. I know it was the reason I worked so hard, and I'm sure without question, it's the reason all the other guys and girls that worked in ECW worked as hard as they did.
You're the first wrestler I've got to have on this show, and I'm really glad it's you, Shane, because, I don't want to sound egotistical here, but to draw a comparison, I mean, I feel this show is very much the, anti-establishment, us against them mentality that you guys had with ECW.
And really, if you go back and look throughout history, it's usually been the rebels that have written history. It's the guys that go against the grain, the guys that are willing to take the chance. It's easy to get up and get in your car and drive to work 9 to 5. And I don't mean for a second to demean anybody that does that, but it's easy to follow the herd.
Right.
Remember the old video? There's a video by the group Yes. I forget the name of the song. Owner of a Broken Heart.
All right, yeah.
It shows there's scenes of people like walking, the whole crowd walking in one direction, going to work and leaving work and everything else, and then the one guy finally says, screw it, I'm going to turn around and walk the other way. And, that aside from taking a fuckload of courage to do that, to say, screw the establishment, I'm going to go this way. A lot of times it's the wrong thing to do. A lot of times it's the dumbest thing to do. But throughout history, when you go back and look at it, you look at the Founding Fathers of America, for instance. I know yours is a Canadian audience, but the Founding Fathers, we look back and we have them, they're giants to us today. But back then they were ordinary men. John Adams is barely over 5 foot tall. These were guys that had to feed their families, had to run their farms, had to run their plantations, do whatever. And yet, somehow looked at the authority and said, fuck you, you're wrong, and there's something bigger. And, America wouldn't be here today if it weren't for those guys. And I'm sure history throughout Canada, America, and around the globe is the exact same thing. It's those people that have walked against the grain, that have changed history and rewrote history. And I think, and certainly not to impart any more importance on ECW, in the wrestling industry, as silly as that industry can be, ECW was a 7+ year experiment at pulling it away from that cartoon bullshit. And we succeeded at that for the time being. And unfortunately, had the wrong person in charge from a business standpoint. Paul Heyman was a brilliant writer and a horrible businessman. But again, I think each thing you do in life, you live and you learn from. The good and the bad, hopefully. And with that in mind, that's part of the things that we've looked into and this new company that we're looking at starting up to bring wrestling back, to do it in a way that benefits the wrestlers and the fans, and hopefully, from a business standpoint, succeeds in the long run. That's really the hope. It's a triumvirate of hopes.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. What can you tell me about what's going to happen there?
Yeah, I said earlier in the interview that, it's amazing how small the world can be. And, for 15+ years, since my departure from ECW, in, I think, 99 or 2000, I've been preaching about bringing the wrestling business back, the sport of wrestling back. And that was, I think, a large part of what ECW was all about. And it came real close and failed. I believe in my bones that it wasn't because ECW's product was a failure. It was because Paul was just a bad businessman.
Well, and you guys wrote a shitload of money.
Yeah, I mean, we made a lot of money. We spent a lot of money. A good businessman would know how to temper those two, to balance those two. It amazes me the older I get, how small the world can be, but I also hear the phrase, how one door closes and another opens. Because I've been preaching this, like I said, for 15 years to anybody that would care to listen, and it just seemed like nobody ever gave a damn. Or if they did give a damn, just didn't care enough to get involved.
Right.
And we went, Cody Knotts, who the writer and director of Pro Wrestling vs. Zombies, had set up a meeting with a person that he had met previously from Southwest Pennsylvania, same area I'm from, that had left years ago to go out and get involved in the technology industry, and had become very successful in the technology industries, and resides between Las Vegas and Los Angeles. Cody Knotts had called him. He had interviewed him for a newspaper that he owned previously, and had contacted this gentleman to ask him if he'd be interested in possibly going the video game compendium to the movie, where you could turn Shane Douglas into a zombie and kill him, or have Shane Douglas kill whoever or whatever. And I thought it was a pretty good idea. So when he set the meeting, he was excited about it because this guy's pedigree in the industry and in technology is impressive. But about a month before, maybe 3 weeks before the meeting, he called me up and he said, "Can you go to Los Angeles with me?" And I thought, what odd that, why would you want me to go to Los Angeles? Because you know what you're talking about. You know the movie as well, every bit as well as I know, and a lot better. You wrote it, and you know what you're looking for in the video game. And he said, well, this guy, he'd like to meet you, and, so I thought, well, maybe he's just a wrestling fan. So, okay, I'll go along and, hello, and take a picture with him, and then let Cody pitch the idea to him. Mm-hmm. And as we sat down, it became quickly very clear to me that this guy was just not a businessman, but he was a rabid wrestling fan. He's a year younger than me, and so grew up watching the exact same stuff that I did, and knew the business, at least from the Pittsburgh scene, at least as well as I did. And as Cody made the start of the pit, we had a dinner meeting one night about 4 hours long, and it was the week of the Super Bowl. And Cody made the first, about 30, 40 minutes into the meeting, Cody threw the first pick to him. And he answered it very briefly and very professionally, and then turned to me and said, "Shane, why is it that wrestling today looks so much different from the wrestling that you and I grew up watching?" And so I answered it, and I kept trying to, every time this is the way the whole evening went. Cody would pitch something, he'd throw it to me, and I'd answer it and try to get it back to the video game. About the third question he asked me, he started texting on his phone. And I was getting a little bit hot. Everybody knows the franchise.
I fucking hate that shit.
A bit of a temper, and I'm thinking, this guy's not even paying attention to me. I'm answering him as sincerely as I can, and he's not paying attention. So, I kept my cool, though, because of the level of the meeting and the kind of person that we're meeting, and he was a very, very nice guy. But after the meeting was over, we were going to our car, Cody could tell I was a little bit hot, and he said, "What are you upset about?" And I said, "Well, the guy keeps asking me questions, and I'm answering him. He's not even paying attention. He's texting on his phone." He laughed. So what's so funny? He said he was listening to everything you were saying. He was texting it to his partners. And so then I took a little different stance on the whole situation and looked back at it and laughed at myself that I was getting so wrapped up into this guy wasn't listening to me as opposed to the broadness of the meeting.
Right.
And, he told us that he would get a proposal to us, and I thought he meant by that, and I believe Cody did too, that he meant he would get a proposal to us for the video game. And Super Bowl Sunday, I'm at the pre-show party at a friend of mine's house, and I get an email from this gentleman, and I read it. As I read it, I laugh for a second. I thought, I must be a little drunk or something. I'm not reading this right. So I left the room, and I went to the back of the house, and I sat down in the back room, and I read it a second time, and I thought, no, I know I'm not reading it right. So I read it a third time very carefully. I'm reading it like each sentence. I'm looking at each word. I'm reading it right. I just can't believe what I'm reading. This guy wants to start a wrestling company, but he wants to start a wrestling company that offers wrestlers health insurance, 401ks, pension plans, and revenue sharing.
Wow.
I was so floored by, because with the industry that I came from, that's just not even a pipe dream. So I called him, and I said, "Is this even doable? Because we've always been told in our industry that it's not." And he laughed, and he said, "That's exactly what I would say if I were like them." This guy has started over 300 companies. I've not done the research. I've done a little bit of research on him, obviously, but he told me that in the 300 plus companies that he started, this is exactly the way he's done. They've all been successful. So that's what got the ball rolling, and we've contacted multitudes of talent. We've gotten dozens and dozens of letters of intent back. And like I said, we've had to put the whole thing not on hold, but just sort of push it back a bit because the Pro Wrestling vs. Zombies movie has really taken on a life of its own, and especially now with it being shown at the Con Film Festival, it's just going to a different place. We're all taken aback by it, because we expected these little things for, much like ECW, a little thing for the fans. The fans really grow to love and respect. And suddenly it's taken on life of its own, becoming something much larger, with Trauma becoming the distributor and its fan base. And so we're excited about and looking forward to the prospects of what it does, and hoping that it entertains the fans that loved us as wrestlers, loves us in the scenes that we act out in.
Not to go backwards, but it seemed to me with your first run with WWF, with the 91 Rumble and all that stuff, it looked like they were going to give you a fairly solid push. Do you know if they had any big plans for you?
Yeah, they did. Vince, I told you earlier, my dad became sick. I had to leave the road, and I went and had a long talk with Vince at that time. And he had told me, was quite a gentleman, and said he worked hard for me, and we're really impressed with you, and the door's always open, welcome to come back at any time. The family comes first. Went in depth talking about his mother and his father, and we had a very long, probably the best one-on-one discussion I've ever had with Vince McMahon. But the idea that they had at that time, Jimmy Hart had written 3 songs. I remember the names of 2 of them. One was called Rockin' Down the Halls, and the other one was called American Girls. And I played bass, and I do some singing. He had written these 3 songs, and he had written like a pop version, a rock version, and a hard rock, the 3 different songs. And we were at the Pittsburgh Civic Arena at a show one night when he brought the songs to me for the first time. Vince McMahon wanted to see if he could create a legitimate rock star. Could he, much like he tried with the XFL and other types of genres, he wanted to see at that time if he could produce a genuine rock star, a John Bon Jovi style rock star. And the outfit that I wore at that time, the conchos, and it was a bit of a western look with denim and white leather, that outfit was created for that character. And the 3 songs that Jimmy Hart had come up with, had a catch to them. They were catchy songs, and I thought could have caught on. And right as we were getting ready to go into the studio to record them, is when Dad got sick, and I had to leave the road. So that sort of put that on hold. I always thought that they would have put it on somebody else. The idea was so far along that it was going to go to somebody else, and I never saw it pop up again after that. So, I wasn't sure if that was something they thought specifically for me or just an idea in general, but it was quite far along. 3 songs were written, and we were ready to go into the recording studio at the time I had to leave.
Shit. Yeah, it sounds... I would have liked to have seen that, actually. That would have been... obviously, being a musician, I'd love to see that angle, and I think you would have been great for that character. And, I was a big fan of the Rockers and, Jericho and, guys that added that element to... and even the Freebirds, you know what I mean? Just bringing rock and wrestling together. Not that we want to talk about the rock and wrestling connection. Dear Lord. But, okay, well, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your time in WWF. Specifically, like when you came back as Dean Douglas and Shawn Michaels forfeited the title to you, and then you lost it very quickly to Razor Ramon that night. I wondered what was going on there. Was that just a case of Shawn didn't want to drop the belt to you? I know I had heard a story that he had been shooting his mouth off, and so was he worried you were going to fuck him up? Was he just trying to keep you down? Was that the Clique at work? Like, what was going on there?
Well, the Clique was pretty potent and pretty powerful at that time, and the guys that were like The Undertaker and Bret Hart that were still getting fairly well pushed. In large part, my opinion is that they did so because they stayed out of the way of the Clique. They didn't interact very much with him. We saw what happened to Bret when he did interact with Shawn. So they kept their heads down and stayed out of the way. I thought that was the exact wrong thing to do because they were in a position that had they stood up as a collective, had the Undertaker, that's easy for me to say from the outside, but had the Undertaker and had Bret Hart and Perfect and the guys that were fairly well pushed guys stood up to the Clique at that time, they could have quite likely nipped in the bud all the politicking that they had done and could have saved a lot of problems for the WWE, for the fans and for the talents, but they didn't. And so those guys had reared their heads in ugly ways and decided that what they were doing was they were going to control, where the belts went and that the belts would be with them. The thing that has always amazed me is with Shawn Michaels especially. Shawn is an incredibly gifted and talented performer. And so to me, I never saw the place for him going there. That he was so good, he was going to be good in spite of what anybody did around him, and was clearly going to be a star regardless of what happened around him. Instead, he chose to, and I think it goes much more to a personal level, that the type of person he is, that he thought that he had to resort to those types of things in order to succeed, as opposed to relying on his talent.
Right.
And the Clique by and large, at the time that I was there, steered Vince around by his nose. When they said they were going to lose this person or that person or whatever. But you had mentioned earlier about Shawn. I got back, we were on a 3.5 week tour of Germany and Switzerland and Czechoslovakia and Austria. For the few weeks leading up to that pay-per-view in Regina, the In Your House. And when I got back, my good friend Davey Boy Smith, who was in the States, on the States side of the tour, was interested for the entire time, and heard Shawn running his mouth. And he called me up and he said, Shane, I'm trying to stir the pot, which is exactly what Davey was trying to do. He said, but this is what Shawn's been saying, that he's going to embarrass me on the pay-per-view. And I said back to Davey, knowing full well that when I said back to him, we'd get back to Shawn. If he tries, I'll stretch him on the pay-per-view. And that quickly became, he had the thing that happened in Rochester, the people that, had beaten him up, which in reality was one person.
Not six.
Yeah, detention. Yeah, not the squadron of Marines beat him up. I think it was the story, or the 10, 12 people or something like that. But that was a demonstration of how very smartly Vince McMahon and the WWE steered the story. They controlled it, and they steered it, and they made it into what they needed it to be, which is great wrestling promotion.
I was surprised when many of the ECW wrestlers turned up in the WWF and that you weren't among them. Why was it that you didn't return? Was there any bad blood with Vince, or what?
Well, I wasn't surprised, was not surprised that they started showing up there because, by that time, it was pretty clear to us in ECW and the guys in ECW, the talent in ECW. Let me clarify for a second. When I say guys, I mean the boys. And when I say the boys, I mean all the talent. I don't mean men versus women, whatever.
Yeah.
Boys to boys. So I just want to clarify that up front. It was pretty clear to the guys and the boys in the dressing room that, Paul was prone to telling a tale now and then. And that if you had an opportunity to go somewhere else and make some more money, that you might want to ought to take it. And so it doesn't surprise me those guys that the ECW talent started popping into WWE and WCW. They were simply following for them. Look, everybody's very well attuned to what's best for them. And far be it for me to say that, hey, Sandman's crazy for going somewhere when I have no idea what Sandman's finances are, what his bills are each month, and so forth. So, that was a decision that everybody made. It didn't surprise me. When I left WWE in '96 and went back to ECW, first you have to understand my reasoning in the first place. When I left ECW in the very first place, I left so with a very heavy heart. It was never my intention. I loved ECW, never wanted to leave. But when it reached the point of Paul Heyman owed me $144,000, I couldn't. As I say that today, I'm embarrassed even saying the number that I didn't want to get to that point. But to be fair to myself, several times previously, Paul Heyman had fallen behind. Previous to that, the furthest behind he'd gone was $36,000. But when he fell behind by the $36,000, he turned right around and would give me the entire, when I would promote shows here in the Pittsburgh area, he would give me the entire take on one of the nights.
Oh, wow.
So I'd walk out with $45,000. And, and he'd call it even. So there was this give and take. And so it wasn't like when you started falling behind, you started going, hey, I'm getting screwed, or hey, what about this? I had obviously banked enough money at that point that I wasn't incapable of paying my bills or whatever. But then when it went from 30 to 50, then 50 to 70, then 70 to 77, 77,000 was the number that he owed me, and the belt dropped to Taz. And, I really had real reservations. None of that to do with Taz. They were the fact that if I dropped that belt, I had no more leverage.
Right.
And he could tell me to go screw off. So it took everything in me and then some to walk in the building that night, because I knew in my bones that I was getting screwed. And when Taz came to me and said, hey, does it have anything to do with this, or is it this? This has to do with you dropping the belt, or with you dropping the belt to me. And I went off. I said, look, pal, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. And so I laid it all out to him. And when I did, to Taz's benefit and his credentials, he said, well, I'm so sorry, I had no idea, and so he got it. But Paul was trying to stir the shit. So we went out that night and tore the house down. That probably the moment I'm most proud of in my career, because it would have been very easy for me. And it was on the table. Bischoff wanted me to come and drop that belt to Flair. And it would have been very easy for me to do so and to have made a crap load of money, far more than I was owed, to do it. Now, in hindsight, from where we sit today, always being 2020, did I do the right thing? You know, it's from what perspective? You know, for my family, absolutely not. And for that, I'm embarrassed. But for my legacy in the business and for what ECW fans have given us, the entire day leading up to going into the building that night, I kept weighing different things out, back and forth. Fuck Paul, no. Fuck Paul, no. You know, I just couldn't bring myself to go and do it. And the one ingredient that convinced me to go ahead and do it was the fans didn't deserve that.
Right.
That they had been so good to us over the years, and me especially, that I couldn't screw the fans. I couldn't go in there or just turn around and drive away from the building and fuck the fans that were looking for Shane Douglas versus Taz. There had been a lot put into that angle. And so that was the reason I went in and did it. So, you know, again, everything in hindsight's always 2020, but, you know, putting yourself looking forward and not knowing the outcome, did I make the right decision or not? It's, you know, for the wrestling historians to say, but I'm proud of the fact that I went ahead and went into the building and didn't just go in there and just lay down and drop the belt. Went in and did so with a flair. You know, no pun intended. You know, I went in there to get the building down and show Paul Heyman and the fans that I was going to do this, and I was going to do it Shane Douglas's way, and that's pretty much what me and Taz did. So I'm proud of that.
Well, and I'm, you know, the fans certainly. I'm grateful that you did that. You know, and I know it must have been hard. You know, that amount of money is being waved in front of you. But so, when ECW folded, though, why didn't you join the WWF? Were you just really disheartened by the folding of ECW?
When I left there in '96, I told myself I will never ever again step foot in this building in this company again. And I did so because I went up there. I left something very comfortable. You know, the ECW was my home. And so when I went there, having pretty much prostrated myself, you know, I mean, it was basically, I reached down and grabbed my ankles and said, okay, Vince, I'm going to trust you. And ended up getting his thumb shoved up my ass. Was, you know, the way I thought, you know, where I come from, this would get you shot. If you tried this in Pittsburgh to somebody, they would take you all back in Homewood and they put a bullet in your head for this. And, you know, so, you know, again, to me, life is always about opportunity and what chances you're willing to take. And you learn from the ones, hopefully, that don't succeed. And I learned very well when I left there in '96. I had learned the lesson of the WWF and told myself I'd never go back. And I swore to that. So when Tommy called me, I was living in Florida, and Tommy Dreamer called me, God, 4 days in a row. And we spoke, I know we spoke for hours every day, but the last time we spoke about 6 hours on the phone. It was right after they decided to reopen ECW. And I knew deep down inside that Vince had no love. So first of all, Vince McMahon had never called ECW to me. He would come up to me, and we spoke about ECW ad nauseum. Every time I saw McMahon, he was asking me questions about ECW. But he never said, hey, when you were in ECW, when you were Extreme Championship Wrestling, or when you were in Extreme, it was always backhanded euphemisms like, hey, when you were in the small pond, when you were in the Blood and Guts Company, when you were in the minor leagues, when you were in the Bingo Hall Company.
Ah, I see.
Yeah. You know, so when Tommy's telling me he wants to reopen ECW and do it right, I kind of laugh at that because I knew that he had no respect for the company, let alone the fans. And so if Paul Heyman wanted to go there and Tommy Dreamer and all the rest of them wanted to go there, and if they made a lot of money going there, God bless them. I've been there and they've made no money. I've made in 6 months of semi-main events, I've made $27,000. And, you know, so I fallen for the rib. And I paid the price for the rib. But when I left there, I was certainly never going to give that jackass a chance at Shane Douglas again. And so I'm stuck to that to this day. You know, I've never sought employment there, never given any serious consideration to employment there when Tommy and others had called, and others had called along the time, you know, Johnny Ace included. I just, fool me once, shame on on you, fool me twice, shame on me. And I couldn't bring myself to it and wouldn't bring myself to it. And I don't look back with any kind of sour grapes to it. You know, I went there, I worked my ass off there, I learned things there, good and bad. What I'm really proud of in the over and under of my career is that I was able to carve out a pretty successful career in the wrestling industry without having to literally or figuratively kiss Vince McMahon's ass. And I guess that to the final epitaph, that's what they put on my headstone. I'm proud of that.
All right, man. Well, it's been a true honor talking to you, Shane.
Hey, I appreciate your time, man. Thank you very much.
Hey, maybe we can do this again sometime.
That'd be great. That'd be awesome.
Cool, pal. Once again, true honor. Have a great one, Shane.
Thanks, Casey. You too, man.
Cheers, brother.
Bye.
Bye. All right, Wildcats, thanks very much for tuning in to this special bonus edition of the Kasey Ferguson Show. Thanks once again to my guest, the franchise, Shane Douglas, for being on the show. For those of you in my hometown of Kingston, Ontario, you can check out a screening of Shane's new movie, Pro Wrestlers vs. Zombies, this Thursday, May the 15th, at the Screening Room in downtown Kingston. There's a screening at 7 o'clock and one at 9:30. I will be at the late show, so by all means, come on over and shoot the shit. For the rest of you, if you'd like to have a screening of Pro Wrestlers vs. Zombies in your hometown local theater, shoot me a message. I'll put you in touch with the cat who handles that shit. And don't forget, you can pick up a copy of the movie on DVD. Just head on over to their Facebook page and you'll be able to purchase one through there. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, Episode 9 of The Kasey Ferguson Show will be out in about 2 weeks. The show will feature interviews with not one, but two guitar legends. George Lynch from Dokken, Lynch Mob, and KXM will join me. Red Beach from Whitesnake, Winger, and Alice Cooper will join me. Plus, music from Black Torah, Eve to Adam, Framing Hanley, 3 Years Hollow, and Rubicon Cross, amongst others. I will catch you then, my friends. Remember, go to heaven for the climate, hell for the company. Till next time, this is Kasey Ferguson, over and out.
Ever heard of a little thing called the internet?
Have your say. Online polls and more at facebook.com/Kasey Ferguson Show.
Ah! For the love of God! There's no one else hear that infernal ringing?
Oh yeah, sure, go ahead and laugh. But according to the latest research, tinnitus, which is what they call it, that's what I've got in my ear. I don't make this shit up. It's an actual disease.